So IGN just posted a new interview with Todd Howard just after the Starfield Direct show, and the interviewer Ryan actually got to play the game for an hour and asked Todd loads of questions. Todd Howard actually talks about his experiences playing the game, what character he's playing, and all these little details we just didn't see in the Starfield Direct showcase, especially mention of the release schedule, Fallout 5 and the Elder Scrolls 6, and where this is actually going to be in the time frame. It's not necessarily good news, but I feel like we've got to hear it and talk about it, and this is my take on what is said here. Let's get started.
Hey everybody, Ryan McCaffrey with IGN. I am joined by my good game development friend, Todd Howard.
Good to see you again.
It is good to see you. We chatted a year ago remotely when you shared some Starfield details with me there. Things that are a little different now because the game is imminent. I played it for about an hour. We just watched, we're recording this the day before, but everybody will have just seen the 45-minute Starfield Direct. There's a lot to get to, Todd. There's a lot going on with this. So I want to just kind of start at the top and we'll kind of work our way down into more nitty-gritty details. This is the first new IP you've done in a couple of decades now. It's been a little while. So totally new thing. It's the biggest exclusive for Microsoft in a long time. And it's certainly the biggest thing Microsoft's put out since they acquired Bethesda. So, pressure. Do you, in all seriousness, do you kind of feel any extra pressure compared to any of the other games you've made, or are you just kind of focus on what you do? I'm just sort of curious if the stuff that we talk about in the gaming community is something that goes through your head or gets talked about in the office at all.
Surely.
Well, clearly, I'm aware of that, everything you said. And compared to our previous games, there's always a lot of attention on what we do. We're very fortunate. But for us, we have put so much into this game. And it is, as you said, our first new IP in over 25 years. It's our first major release in about 8 years.
Yeah.
So for us, we have just put so much into it that we're just doing everything we can to make the best game that we can.
I feel like this really came across in the Starfield Direct show. They had all the developers working on the game talking about how passionate they were about it, and I just felt that love, attention, and care that's clearly been put into Starfield, which is one of the reasons I have a lot of hope for this game now. After watching that, I feel a lot better.
Hope that everybody loves it, so we feel we're on the right track, and we're really fortunate, I think, with some of those things you said to get the attention.
Yeah.
And that we know there's a lot of people out there looking forward to it, and we just view our jobs as, hey, just do the best job we can do, put everything we can into the game, and I hope everyone loves it.
Ready to lift off when you are, Captain.
Engines ready.
The frontier is fueled and ready, Captain.
So I think the last time we talked, or maybe the time before, I gave you a little grief for you Babe Ruthian, you called your shot with 11-11-22 really far in advance.
I did.
And I think we were having a little fun about that before the delay. So, it's good. We want a better game. We don't want, you to just make the date just for the sake of making the date. So just out of curiosity, how has the extra time been spent specifically with Starfield?
Well, look, it's just such a big game. And as you do these things, you do your best as it comes to release dates and projections. But given the scale of it, if one thing is off that by a percentage, that can escalate quickly to more time. And we've really spent it most of this year playing the game a ton, over and over, and making sure that it's balanced, it's as fun as possible, honing systems and interface, obviously bug fixing and all of those things, performance, and really getting it where we're really, really sure and solid on what we're putting out there for everybody.
Well, speaking of performance, Xbox gamers went through a little unpleasant surprise with the last big Bethesda exclusive not too long ago with Redfall, and that maybe not performing on console on the Series X, kind of how we'd hoped. So I think really all we're looking for is not necessarily everything's got to be 4K 60 or 120 frames, but just kind of nobody likes surprises, when it comes to the game that they're going to buy, how it performs, how it feels. Now, you're
I think it was interesting because with Redfall, they had to put the labels on the Redfall boxes to say it wasn't 60 FPS, so I don't even know if that was a planned thing. The development of Redfall just seems completely different to how Bethesda have been developing this game for 8 years, so I feel like that it's a weird comparison, but I get it.
Your games have always been these just boundary-pushing, envelope-pushing, huge open, detailed worlds. They've been 30 frames per second on console traditionally. So I'm going to just turn it over for you for a second here. Just lay out, just so that nobody is surprised come September 6th.
Sure.
What are we looking at if I'm going to play this on a Series X, or even if you want to mention Series S as well, like what's the experience going to be, technically speaking?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. I think it'll come as no surprise, given our previous games. What we go for are always these huge open worlds, fully dynamic, hyper detail where anything can happen. And we do want to do that. It's 4K on the X, it's 1440 on the S. We do lock it at 30 because we want that fidelity. We want all that stuff. We don't want to sacrifice any of it. Fortunately, in this one, we've got it running great. It's often running way above that. Sometimes it's 60. But on the consoles, we do lock it because we prefer the consistency.
Yeah.
Right? You're not even thinking about it. And we don't ever want to sacrifice that.
So this is huge. This is huge. So on PC, it's 60 FPS, uncapped frame rate. Obviously, he mentions that it's usually running above 30, but on console, they specifically capped it at 30 FPS. And I can attest to this from playing previous games from other developers. When they shout home about it being 60 FPS, then you get there and you actually play it and you're on that really intense fight scene or an open world aspect part where there's a lot going on and it drops down to 30. Oh boy, does it feel bad, and it looks bad, and it's noticeable because you've been playing it at 60 FPS for ages. So I understand them capping it at 30 FPS on consoles. I'm a PC player, so obviously I'm going to be playing at 60 FPS and have no complaints. Let me know what you guys think about that in the comments, though.
Yeah.
Right? You're not even thinking about it, and we don't ever want to sacrifice that experience that makes our games, really, really special. So feels great. We're really happy with how it feels even in the heat of battle, and we need that headroom because in our games really anything can happen.
Speaking of tweaking and optimizing, there were some rumors going around that id Software was helping you guys out with the combat, with tuning combat. I'm just curious, was there any truth to that at all?
They did not help us with the Well, first of all, I'd say, being in the company, knowing the folks at id Software for a long time, I'm like a huge Doom fan.
I mean, they know what they're doing. That's why I ask.
They're the absolute best. Doom Eternal is one of my favorite games. And so with Fallout 4, they did give us a few tips on how to handle combat.
Yeah.
But in Starfield, we redid the combat ourselves, and it's really feeling great. But id has helped us really more on the graphic. They've helped us on the graphics side.
Oh, nice.
So we get into motion blur. It's just how the game feels smooth. Some other things that they do in id Tech that we wanted to bring over into Creation Engine 2, and they helped us do that. And it's great.
Awesome.
I mean, combat-wise, I will say, since the first presentation when they showed Starfield and the combat, a lot of the community had negative feedback about how that was looking a bit choppy, a bit weird, a bit janky, and now the combat's looking so much better. Look, I'm excited for the combat.
Nice neighbor to have down the street.
It is, and I love
the door and ask for some milk and sugar, right?
And I'm such a fan of what they do, so being able to get an early look at what they're doing next. I'm not here to talk about that, but it's just.
Oh, I mean, feel free to talk about that, if you want. All right,
Spicy.
so I'm curious, given you mentioned that it's going to be just shy of 8 years between shipping Fallout 4 and shipping Starfield, which to my knowledge is the longest that you've ever gone between shipping games that you've directed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, obviously we had 76 in between, but it's something that I've directed, yes.
Yeah.
That is the longest.
So, can you I'm just curious about what was your initial vision for Starfield and how that's either stayed true and borne out or evolved over the course of 8 years?
That's a great question. I will say this, that the game sticks to the original vision. That took longer than I wanted. I'd say about halfway through the project, you realize this is why nobody tries to make this game. So it's been when you do these things and you take some risks and you're really ambitious, that can be a very windy path sometimes, is how I'd say it. but it is true to the vision we had for our type of role-playing game set in space and where your mind kind of goes. And we want to, as much as possible, say yes to the player. Like, can I do this? Can I do this? Yes, 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 yes. And space is big. So the amount of content that we ended up making to have that really feel authentic to that, that did grow and grow from where we originally started.
I mean, so, neither one of us is getting younger. We've both been doing our respective things for a while.
Yeah.
So, are you okay with things taking 8 years again in the future? Or
not my plan. I don't think you would ever plan for that. Sometimes that's how it ends up, so that you know that what you're putting on the screen is what you want. But you're right. I'm not getting younger. You sort of start,
Like how many games do you have left in you?
Yeah, how many games are ahead of me?
Yeah.
Versus behind me. And so that does start to enter your head.
That is a really interesting question, because he was clearly trying to get the fans in on The Elder Scrolls 6. How long away is it? Do you have like a smaller window that you want to narrow it down to, like your previous games? Todd said he didn't plan for it to be 8 years, obviously, but it seems to be so much scope here and so many things you want to include in a space game. And it looks like they've ticked all those boxes that fans want from a space game. Even adding a more in-depth romance system into a Bethesda game, which is something we haven't really seen, but fans have always wanted that. I really wouldn't be surprised if The Elder Scrolls 6 is still coming out in 2028, but obviously it's within Todd's interest to not have it take that long, which is nice to hear. But first, a word from today's sponsor, a 3D strategy RPG called EverLegion, where you can collect hundreds of heroes across 7 different factions, and it's completely free to play on mobile. Get 25 free pulls after the tutorial. We even got lucky and pulled the Elite Garzak, an elite hero who will surely destroy our foes. His ultimate restores health, and he can even buff his own agility and damage. A true battle brother. Use the Wellspring to ascend your top 5 heroes to save resources and build the ultimate team. Then jump into the Sky Tower or Isles of Mist to challenge yourself against different bosses, each requiring a different strategy to take out. This is my hero collection so far, but my favorite is definitely the Undead Necromancer with 4 arms. He's an S tier hero and a powerful support because he gives a huge heal to your allies while massively boosting his own attack. You're going to want to grab him. EverLegion is easy to pick up for casual play since you can play it anywhere you go. But if you like dragons, they've just added a new Dragon Abyss in Pilferer's Blitz, where you'll earn an epic dragon egg and other awesome rewards if you can defeat it. So download the game from the link below and use my exclusive redeem code ELESO. There's only 100 though, so make sure you use it quickly.
Resistant to my otherwise irresistible charm.
Would you point to any other games as inspiration for Starfield along the way? I mean, not in the literal sense of, I want to do what they did, but in terms of like giving the player a feeling that, like, something that, a game you played that you really wanted to convey. Like, I mean, when you first showed me this game a while back, I mean, I certainly was reminded of Elder Scrolls and Fallout. There's the DNA is there, but the other, I would say, 2 non-Bethesda games that I got little vibes from were No Man's Sky and Mass Effect. Well,
clearly, those other games that are science fiction, I think you might look at and say, okay, this is science fiction, it's like that. I think to minute, obviously on the ground, it has similarities to Elder Scrolls and Fallout and the things that we've made and how it feels in your hands, or some certain mechanics. But believe it or not, it's the games that put you in a world, that transport you to a place. So I think it probably also, as a flow, probably has more of a feeling of like a Red Dead 2, right? Like I'm living the Western fantasy.
Yeah.
And so in this, you're living this science fiction explorer fantasy, and sometimes that's being on a barren planet and nothing is going on.
Or an Old West town, like we saw that in the direct,
right?
Old West inspired,
and all of that. So for me, it's games that where I feel I am rooted in the reality of this universe of the game, and everything else kind of disappears.
Love that.
There was, as people have now...
That is the great thing about a Bethesda game, to be honest, having that total immersion. A lot of other games don't get it quite right, but you can really go back to Skyrim and get lost in that world as a different character each time you play. And I think it's that feeling of getting lost and immersed in a Bethesda world.
There was, as people have now seen, there was a lot in the direct, in the 45 minutes that were covered. A big takeaway for me was that for everything we saw, there was just sort of these hints of constellation, and that seems to be who the main story is going to revolve around. But separate from that, or kind of, I guess, adjacent to that, it seems like there's so much to do in this game that are you going to be okay if players just don't end up really necessarily even paying much attention to the main story and just end up kind of doing their own thing out there, or
I mean, that in a nutshell is a Bethesda game. They even said in the direct show itself, you're going to get massively sidetracked, have all these other interesting quests and things to do before you remember that actually you're meant to be doing this main quest.
Are you taking kind of greater pains to make sure that people want to stay and get through that main path before they get back out to the wild space frontier?
Doesn't
It's a
matter.
good question. I view our job as giving people the menu.
Yeah.
Here are the things you can do, and it's a very large game. Obviously, there's a lot to it. It can be complicated at times, and we have found though that the gaming audience, particularly our fans, they want to have all those options. And I do think more than anything we've done, I really believe this, that the more you give to Starfield, the more it gives back to you. And that was one of our goals. And so
I think that in essence is also one of the reasons I'm so excited to see what the mod creators do for this game. Because if they're giving all these extra things you can do into the game through mods, then Starfield's going to give you even more back in terms of the experience and how immersive that is.
I do hope people play the main quest, and I hope people do this, but most of all, I want them ultimately to do whatever they want to do.
Yeah. I mean, I know you don't want to give away a lot about the main storyline, certainly, and people don't want to have that spoiled for them, but what I would be curious of, given, again, the scale and scope of this that the direct conveyed and that I barely scratched the surface of when I was playing a little while ago, of these 1,000 planets, of all this stuff you've got going on, how much of it will the main story lead you towards? Like, you know what I mean? Like, because you probably want to show as much of the diversity and as many of the cool places that your team worked really hard on over the course of the campaign, but you can't show everything. You can't lead them up to 1,000 different planets, right?
We want to keep it sort of, manageable. That's what I would say in the main quest. So we hit some high points, but not even, it's still a small fraction, like you're saying, to what's in the game. And for us, like a main quest, we want it to sort of pay off. There are people that do want to come to a game, do the main story, and feel that, okay, I've won. I can now do something else. I think that's okay too. But we've also learned, look, we're sitting here, it's 12 years after Skyrim. We're looking at a game that has over 60 million copies, and all these people playing it, and they're still playing it. And so we have learned we need to build in from the beginning a game that has this long-term play thought of. So that, hopefully, people are playing Starfield a long time from now.
Well, on that note, you guys have always done post-release content. If you've had like major paid, bigger expansions, you've had smaller scale stuff. I can't imagine that you'd even want to necessarily expand this game geographically moving forward, because there's already a ton there. So, like, I know
But they can easily make new DLC locations with narrative stories, experiences, and I thought he was going to touch on Creation Club and the potential Skyrim and Fallout marketplaces that may be coming. I'm really hoping he does ask about that, but I feel like we won't get info on it.
And you're not here to just give away announce your post-release plan, but like conceptually, how are you thinking about it, given that this is like a giant universe rather than just a continent, like in Cyrodiil and in an Elder Scrolls game?
Right, it's a great question. I mean, look, we're going to be doing a lot of add-on content for Starfield. We love doing it. Our fans love it. We will have announced sort of the first one that's going to, we're going to do a story expansion pack that's going to be coming. Our plan is to do things of varying sizes, and we've done
a story expansion pack. So obviously he said the main quest has the feeling that you can finish the game and you have that feeling of completion and now I can go away and do something else. We have lots of other factions that were revealed in the main Starfield Direct, some of which look very interesting. I don't know if there'll be other story paths to explore, but what I think he means by that is the kind of story expansion like we saw in the Brotherhood of Steel expansion for Fallout 3, when it kind of took you a bit further along that path on the story that maybe they didn't have time to tell that part and it had to get pushed into a DLC sort of thing.
Done a lot of that in our previous games, so it's something that we a story expansion pack that's going to be coming. Our plan is to do things of varying sizes, and we've done a lot of that in our previous games, so it's something that we really like doing, our fans like. So despite the size of the game, there's still things we want to add as far as features in the future and stories and things like that. So
features.
We think this is going to gain, hopefully, that's going to continue for a long time that way.
Good to hear. Always good to hear. And the soundtrack.
At the end of the Direct, we heard from a bunch of folks on your team about their favorite moments that they've had while playing. Can you paint me a specific picture of a memorable moment for a character that you've rolled that you've been playing in recent months, like some just memorably cool scenario?
Let's see, just a few weeks ago I had landed on one of the early planets and this sandstorm blew through and I went to run away from it, and this, ships can randomly, once in a while they can randomly land, like enemy ships can land. So I'm going through the sandstorm, the ship landed and I get in this firefight and I got on the ship, and while I'm shooting the guys on the surface of the planet, the ship took off into space. So now I'm in outer space on the ship, and I was just like, can that happen? I guess that can happen. Yeah.
Dude, that's sick. The idea that... So I love this, that Bethesda can build mechanics into their game where it then creates these moments where you're playing the game as someone who made it, and you jump into the ship, you're killing the guys thinking, oh, I'm going to steal this ship. And then it just flies off to space, and you're like, oh, no, all my stuff is back there. I was, exploring that planet, and now suddenly you're in space, and, I'm going to have to, re-land, or where's this ship going to? And it leads you on this random other adventure, and I think it's moments like that that are really memorable to, playing a Bethesda game, like when...
One of my favorite moments from Oblivion, which I've told you many times is my favorite game of yours. That's the one that I have the most positive memories with.
That was my childhood.
Was randomly finding a unicorn in the forest.
That is yes, you can do that there.
So, are there 50 of those kinds of things?
There's a
in
good
this
number.
Game where
there's
just
a lot.
Stuff that's not a quest. You'll just randomly happen upon this memorable special
I don't want to spoil what they are, but yeah, of course. We love that stuff. And we have some really, really special ones in this game that I think I'm very curious to see how long after the game is out, that people discover it.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so excited for that. That's one of the most important things to me, that the game has these untold stories, things that you aren't directed to from a quest, that you just discover a mine. There's no one there, everyone's dead, and you just find a few notes, and then you realize that there was a really elaborate story happening here, and then it leads you onto this massive elaborate lore video about the location and what really happened there and trying to figure it out. And I just love that kind of content that comes out of Bethesda games, so I'm glad to hear, obviously, this is a Bethesda game. Yes, it has that. Great.
Now, you mentioned Skyrim and tens and tens of millions of copies of that, and the sort of historic runaway train that thing's been. I mean, you probably can't count on that level of success again necessarily.
No.
So what does success look like for you with this game?
That's a good question, because with Game Pass, we're obviously going to be bringing in, probably the biggest audience that we've had for a launch. And so it just makes you really fortunate to know that you can take these kind of risks with a game like this and be ambitious, but still know that it's going to get in a lot of people's hands. So, I mean, I think for us...
I actually think it's quite dangerous because, we've seen this with other games. Essentially, what I mean by that is you release a game on Game Pass, you have loads of people playing at launch, lots of people to record any potential issues or bugs, and some of those people playing might pick it up and be like, oh, trial Starfield has just come out, it's free, I'll download it on Game Pass. They jump on, they experience a bit of it, and let's say, for example, the game's not good at launch, like No Man's Sky wasn't good at launch. And then that's their experience. They stop playing, they never go back to it again, and it's a double-edged sword, It can either be super successful, everyone tells their friends, they all jump onto Game Pass and play it themselves for free, or it works the opposite way, as we've seen historically. So I think, as good as it sounds, it is also a little bit scary.
Be ambitious, but still know that it's going to get in a lot of people's hands. So, I think for us it is that, people say they love the game. And I think all games go through a couple phases. They have this phase where the game isn't out yet. What do people think of it? Then there's what do they think of it the first week it comes out? But then you got to think about, what do they think after a year? What do they think after year 2? And so I hope that, it sort of stands the test of time, like our other games. I don't focus on the number of users in that way.
But I guess you can't...
You have to think about the long game, right? Because look at Skyrim, look at Fallout, look at the Creation Club content and how much more money that's generated. They continue to re-release Skyrim. People continue to buy it with even the slightest update and a little bit of content added just because the game is so good. It's got such longevity. So the fact they've designed Starfield with that in mind tells me that I think it's going to definitely tick that box. And I would actually argue I'm more concerned about how this game looks in 1 year, 2 years' time, and how Bethesda is supporting it. Will you still be continuously exploring space a year from now? That to me is almost more important than the launch week or the first couple of weeks of the game being out.
But I guess you can't really design for a game that will stand the test of time, right? You just have to do your best and hope that it works out.
That is very true. You do the absolute best that you can do. Again, the whole team is we have really poured ourselves in this one over a lot of years. And, you cross your fingers, you do everything you can. There are systems you can design that say, hey, look, this system is going to work over a long-term play, over hundreds of hours, like a character system, versus, after 30, you've burned through everything. That's certainly not the case here.
It's clearly not, based on what I've seen so far. The 1,000 planets number is the big one that you've been throwing out. What's the ratio of the procedurally generated stuff to the handcrafted stuff?
Well, the planet.
Procedurally generated stuff to the handcrafted stuff.
Well, the planets themselves, the landscapes, pretty much all procedural. We kind of make these large, think kilometer-sized tiles we've generated, and those get kind of wrapped around the planet. As far as handcrafted content, more than any game we've done. I've stopped giving out numbers, but just in the dialogue, it's more than Skyrim and Fallout 4 combined, just in dialogue, right? So as we get into locations and art and everything, we've done more.
And you have to bear in mind as well, it's more than Fallout and Skyrim combined, and Fallout 4 had a voice protagonist. Starfield does not have a voice protagonist, so that gives you an idea of just how much dialogue there is going to be. Now, yesterday I did a video going into detail about how procedural generation works in Starfield. Essentially, you're approaching a planet, the planet is then procedurally generated in terms of the landscape and the mountains using the tile set. And then when you're actually there discovering these locations, the locations themselves are handcrafted locations. I'll link that video in the description if you're interested in more information about that. It means we still get that Bethesda world experience, which I am hyped for.
Is it reasonable to suggest that if Starfield is as awesome and successful as we all hope it is, that as gamers, is it reasonable to think that a Starfield 2 is 10 plus years away? Because the reason I bring this up, not to bring it back to how much time do we all have left, but you have always kept... Is
this going to get depressing?
No, I hope not.
Okay.
But you've always...
Because he's got a point though, because if we've got The Elder Scrolls 6 next, that still seems like it's a way away, guys. And then Fallout 5 hasn't even been mentioned. And then we go back to Starfield 2. So I think the intent when they designed this, and he said this multiple times in interviews, is that this is a game that he wants people to, play for a long time. And he's like, what does it feel like 2 years from now? How are we still supporting it? How the content's going to work? We won't see Starfield 2, I think, for like at least a minimum a decade.
Kept your team clearly on purpose as one team. Bethesda. No, I hope not.
Okay.
But you've always kept your team clearly on purpose as one team. Bethesda Games Studios, your team, and you had been alternating between Elder Scrolls and then once you acquired it, Fallout, and you'd gone back and forth. And now you've had this 8-year Starfield thing in here. You've already committed to Elder Scrolls 6 as the next thing. You said it's in pre-production. And then last year when we talked, you said, yep, Fallout 5, I want to do that. That'll be next.
That was more of like a general, it will clearly be after Elder Scrolls 6 at some point.
Okay,
let me clarify that one.
All right, go ahead.
At some point in the future.
But
Elder Scrolls 6 is the next one.
Yeah, but if Starfield's awesome and you want to do another one, and the team wants to do another one, and the company wants another one, it sounds like it's probably going to be a while.
I don't have a great answer for you there. It's an astute observation.
I mean, I'm not trying to get you to unveil the roadmap. Like, I'm just because again, you've kept your team smaller. You have to date not like grown a second team within the studio, unless you have, and that's
well, we have what I would call a full size group team on 76 still.
Right.
Updating that game, it's doing great, very fortunate. But you're right in that we have gotten bigger. We have 4 studios. We have the one in Rockville, we have Montreal, we have Austin, we have Dallas. So we have gotten bigger to handle all of this. We work with a lot of partners on stuff. But that doesn't speed things up necessarily, right? You need a certain size. We're relatively small comparatively,
right,
to do these things. And I think if we look at Skyrim, again, not the plan to have an Elder Scrolls 6 this far after Skyrim, but in today's day, people are playing these games for longer. So our ability, like we talked about, to support Starfield, whereas maybe in the old days you would put it out and then you'd go on to a sequel, now we can support that game for a much longer period of time, which is what our plan is. And then as we look to like an Elder Scrolls 6, that is one where like, I probably shouldn't say this, but if I do the math, I am not getting any younger. How long do people play an Elder Scrolls for? That may be the last one I do.
Oh my god! That would mean that the Elder Scrolls 7, Todd is going to be retired by then, essentially. That may be the last one I do. That would probably, like Elder Scrolls 7. Man. I've been playing this dude's games since my childhood, so that's just quite a surreal thing. I had to let that settle in for a second. What are the chances that my favorite games in the gaming industry are Fallout, Elder Scrolls, and probably Starfield's going to be among them now, and I have to wait for this studio to kind of just touch one every decade or so? Like, it's worth the wait, but at the same time it feels kind of sad that no one's doing anything with that IP because it's just such a beautiful thing, but also you don't want someone to mess it up.
I do. I don't know.
The last Elder Scrolls.
The last Elder Scrolls.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't know.
I mean, I do the math as a gamer, and it's like, am I even going to be playing Elder Scrolls 6 on the Series X, or am I going to be playing that on the next thing? Because it's crazy how long the games that you make, they take a long time.
I wish they did. I want them to be faster, but that speed isn't the goal.
Right. Or should it
be? The goal is...
Ryan is nailing this interview. He's asking the most subtle questions, like, is the Elder Scrolls 6 going to be on the Series X? I don't think it will be. I think from what Todd said about the technology and stuff doesn't even exist yet, a few years back at Brighton Direct, in another really niche interview he did.
Hey, what's the product? What's the vision? How do we do this? And how do we continue to support the ones that we currently have? Because we have millions of people playing Fallout 4, millions playing 76, Skyrim. So it's about, hopefully have that with Starfield.
I think they will, because it's a single-player Bethesda
You had told me
game.
last year that you want to direct Fallout 5, like that you want that to be your game at some point down the road. But now with the Microsoft, Bethesda, Xbox Game Studios family getting a lot bigger, you did work with Obsidian years ago with New Vegas. Could any of the games that you and your team have created, any of these 3 franchises, would you make that? Would you want to work with any of them potentially on something in the future?
I mean, I can't say never to any of that. For us, it is what's going to get us the best product.
Yeah.
How do we stay focused? I think there's a lot of times where you can get unfocused and try to do too many things at once, and then they don't end up necessarily the way you want. And so if I look at other franchises or I look at entertainment in general, I haven't noticed like the time gap between things being a negative.
Right.
Right? They can be a negative when you think about it and you make a calendar.
Yeah.
Hey, when
well,
Starfield 2.
Look at Grand Theft Auto. Like
Exactly.
That hasn't suffered in the
Or
But, when you look at, hopefully Starfield's the same, when you look at Grand Theft Auto, look at how they have supported the game even now. It's almost like a live service. They've made more money on their in-game currency transactions than they have, I think, in any other game in the game industry. It's ridiculous. It's like a cash cow for them. So you have to think about how you support these games, and I'm glad Starfield has had that consideration. Skyrim didn't. Then they were kind of like, oh, how can we support this? But it was several years after release, after all the DLC had come out. Then they did Creation Club and all this other stuff and the remaster. So now I'm really interested to see what the support looks like for Starfield, because that will give us an idea of what it looks like for The Elder Scrolls 6 and Fallout 5.
the gaps between, I think Half-Life 3 will do fine, right? So, so even though in the moment, you're like, how do I bring that closer to reality today? Because I want to play it. Those gaps, these are still evergreen franchises that I think when they come, it's about just doing it right.
Yeah. Well, that's what we as gamers want to hear too, certainly. So Starfield, I played an hour. It felt like 3 minutes. There was, and you were hustling me along to different save files. Go look at this. Go look at this. What's the character you're playing now? Because you've got the traits. You've got the background. So what are you maining right now?
Well, I try to do it all.
We all do.
Right now, I'm digging deep on spaceships. So, you could say in some respects, this is 5 or 6 games in one, right? It's the spaceship game, it's a on-the-ground game, it's just a dialogue game, it's an outpost game, it's a crafted game. It does all of these things, and it always is tricky.
That is one of my concerns as well, as it does all these things. I'm really excited to see how all of these things actually come together and how successful they are together. One thing I think they've solved is in Fallout 4, they had lots of settlement locations, and they just kind of turned out to be meh, little farm, and then you can build there and turn it into a settlement. A lot of people didn't interact with that, and the people who didn't kind of ended up with 30 or so locations in the game that were just settlement locations, like a blank slate for you to build on. Whereas this, in Starfield, we have all these handmade locations that they've said they've made, more so than any other game. And then anywhere on these planets, you can just build yourself an outpost. You can literally build yourself your own house in any of these locations, just with an awesome view. And you can sit there and look out over the cool planets you've gone to and just check out the views. All I need now is a mod that lets me teleport between them, so I can go in some different rooms, different windows, and look out at different galaxies. Oh, damn, that would be cool.
And it always is tricky for us to get a good game flow where those things don't feel like they're separate games, that they can weave in and out of them in a way that is holistically creates something greater than the sum of its parts.
What a view! It's a feast for the eyes. Off we go to another adventure.
To help contextualize Starfield for players before they get the chance to play it themselves, what's the feeling that you try to give people with Elder Scrolls? What's the feeling that you try to give people with Fallout? And what's the feeling that you try to give players with this?
That's a good question. I would say if you think about Elder Scrolls with a fantasy world, who would you want to be and what would you want to do? We want to provide that.
Yeah.
And then Fallout, the same thing in a post-apocalyptic environment.
Yeah.
How does that factor into the things you find? And how does crafting is very unique in Fallout when it comes to that? Or what's the vibe of the people? What are they sacrificing to stay alive? And then when you get to Starfield and science fiction, same sort of thing where if you were to open it up and you could do anything, how are we providing that experience? And
essentially a Bethesda game of space, which is exactly what we want.
we love exploration, so when you get into a game like this, that's why people say, why do you have 1,000 planets? Because we'd rather give you the option to do that than say no.
Yeah.
And so I think if people drift toward fantasy, they're going to love it. You know, they're going to stick with Elder Scrolls. If they like post-apocalyptic, they go to Fallout. They like science fiction. We hope that Starfield fills that kind of desire to play that kind of thing.
So there you have it. That is the Starfield Todd Howard interview. Well done, Ryan. This interview is obviously incredible, and some of the questions you asked so cleverly that I feel like we actually got a bit of an idea for the Elder Scrolls 6 and Fallout 5. If you guys want to check out Procedural Generation and Starfield, I'm going to leave that video just over here for you to watch, and I'll obviously be doing lots of other breakdowns and the other parts of the showcase into smaller bite-sized videos, just going over what I'm excited about, really. You can subscribe for that if you're interested. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.